The most recent Pokemon Presents gave us a ton of new information regarding new Pokemon content, but what excited me the most was the new information about Pokémon Legends Z-A. Getting right into things, I want to start with how we now know the game will begin. We learned from the Pokemon Presents trailer that Harmony and Paxton are not Lumio City natives. They actually appear to have moved to Lumio City by train. We were shown a scene of Harmony arriving in a train station in Lumio City where she does not yet have the Mega Ring that we know she will obtain during the plot of Legends Z-A. But she also doesn't seem to have any Team MZ insignia on her clothing. What's Team MZ? Hold on to that thought, I'll get back to that soon. Harmony's lack of a Mega Ring and any Team MZ insignia tells us that this is probably how Legends Z-A will start. This is a typical Pokemon introduction, similar to the beginning of Legends Arceus and also very similar to how Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald started with the player just moving to Hoenn. But the question becomes, where did Harmony and Paxton move from? Well, if I had to guess, the answer to that question is likely Johto. I think Johto is likely Harmony and Paxton's home region, considering the slight design similarities between Harmony and Paxton and Ethan and Lyra. But also, as I mentioned in my previous video, Legends Z-A was developed during the 25th anniversary of Gen 2. So I think it's extremely likely that Harmony and Paxton moved from Johto. Their arrival by train also seems to imply that Kalos is connected to Johto by land. This isn't all that surprising if you truly dig deep into the placements of the Pokemon regions, but it is possible further evidence that the Pokemon world is not a one-to-one representation of our world. I'll make a video about where I think each region most likely is meant to be in the Pokemon world at a later date. Now that I've fully addressed what I believe to be the start of the game, I can finally address what Team MZ is. Team MZ appears to be a group of vigilante young trainers who want to protect the peace of Lumio City. Among its members, we have Harmony or Paxton, Urbane or Tawny, and two new trainers that the trailer introduced us to. Lita and Naveen are very interesting characters with very interesting designs. Let's start by taking a look at Lita. Lita is a dance school student who, just like Harmony and Paxton, is not a Lumio City native. Lita is a dance school student who wants to become a professional dancer. However, it seems that the dance school that Lita attends does not include room and board. It also seems that Lita did not move to Lumio City in the same way that Harmony and Paxton have, as Lita originally joined Team MZ in exchange for housing. This means that Lita probably would be homeless without Team MZ, which I find very interesting. Lita potentially being homeless without Team MZ implies that she might not have any family in Lumios that can support her, or that if she does have a family, she doesn't get along with them to the point where she does not want to live with them. I mentioned the anti-homeless benches in my previous video, and a lot of people told me that I was wrong to point out the anti-homeless benches. But Lita being at risk of being homeless herself reinforces the idea that homelessness might be a central theme in Legends Z-A. There is another element involved in Lita's potential homelessness, that being a shady mafia-like influence, but I'll address that later in the video. I bring up Lita's familial ties because Lita has a lot in common with a Pokemon character introduced in X and Y. It might not seem like it at first, but Lita shares a resemblance with Tierno. Both of these characters look a little like each other, but more interestingly, they have their hair dressed in a similar fashion. Both Lita and Tierno have these three tufts of hair that stick out on the top of their head. Outside of physical similarities, even their character goals are the same. Tierno in X and Y wanted to become a professional dancer, which is exactly what Lita is pursuing. The physical similarities between Lita and Tierno may imply that Tierno could be Lita's father. We know that Legends Z-A takes place after X and Y for reasons I stated in my previous video, but we don't know how long after. Maybe Tierno is currently in his 30s or 40s in Legends Z-A and he's had a daughter. Or if he's not her father, maybe Tierno is her older brother. Tierno never mentioned his family in X and Y as far as I know, so let's set aside the physical similarities and just call it a coincidence. However, I think there is a much more likely explanation for these physical similarities and similar goals. I believe that Tierno has become a very popular professional dancer, and he is the director of the dancing school in Lumio City that Lita attends. I think Tierno's dancing inspired Lita to pursue dancing herself, and I think that Tierno is most likely Lita's idol. I also think that if Tierno is Lita's idol, then it makes a lot more sense for why Lita would style her hair in the same way. While it is possible that Lita and Tierno are somehow related, I think this scenario is far more likely. There are two more details that I'd like to discuss about Lita before we move on from her. The first is that her partner Pokemon is a Staryu. The second and far more interesting detail is that while Lita doesn't appear to have a Mega Ring in the trailers, Lita does have a Mega Ring in her Sugimori art. Considering that Staryu is Lita's partner Pokemon and that Lita will be acquiring a Mega Ring at some point in the story, I think it's highly likely that Starmie will be receiving a Mega Evolution. A lot of you are probably very excited about this, but unfortunately I am not. I would have much rather had Starmie receive an actual evolution instead of a Mega Evolution. Some of you may be confused as to why, but think about it this way. Mega Evolution has been missing from most of the Pokemon games released in the last decade. The last time Mega Evolution appeared in a main series title was in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and that was 7 years ago. I really don't like the idea of certain Pokemon having evolutions that are not only locked behind a temporary mechanic that Game Freak is sure to remove again at some point in the future, but also giving a Pokemon a Mega Evolution prevents it from ever getting a real evolution, one that can't be taken away by the removal of a temporary gimmick. Sableye and Mawile will never get a real evolution now. The reason is because Mega Evolution's entire basis is pushing a Pokemon to evolve beyond what it is normally capable of. This is why Mega Evolution is often described as being painful to the Pokemon that is engaging in it. Getting back to Starmie, if Lita's Mega Ring implies Starmie will be getting a Mega Evolution, then this means Starmie will never get a real evolution, which I think is an absolute shame, especially considering this theoretical Mega Starmie is at best temporary. Naveen is the second new member of Team MZ that we have been introduced to. Naveen is an aspiring fashion designer who likely is responsible for the creation of the Team MZ logo. Naveen originally joined Team MZ in exchange for studio space. Naveen and Lita both joining Team MZ means that neither of these characters are founding members. It seems as though Team MZ is based in Hotel Z, which is currently being operated by AZ. I already talked a lot about AZ in my previous video, but I think his role in the story will be limited in that Team MZ is simply utilizing his hotel as a meeting or living or studio space. There is plenty of room after all. Getting back to Naveen himself though, I've seen a few people mention that Naveen looks similar to Grant. Beyond their skin tone and the colorful aspects of their hair, I'm not sure that I believe these two are meant to resemble one another in the same way as Lita and Tierno. Naveen is personally nothing like Grant. Grant is kind and outgoing, while Naveen is mysterious, quiet, and reserved. Grant is a rock climber, while Naveen pursues professional design. Their eye colors are also very different, which doesn't necessarily mean they aren't related, but I think it makes it less likely. As far as how they could be related, I don't think Naveen could be Grant's son, as Grant was shown to be in a relationship with Viola in the Pokemon anime, and I'd think Naveen's skin tone would be lighter if he were Grant and Viola's son, or maybe he'd at least have Viola's eye color. That's right, Naveen doesn't have Grant or Viola's eye color. His are a striking purple. Of course, the Pokemon anime is not canon to the games, and even if Grant and Viola dated at one point, it's also possible that they broke up. If Viola is Naveen's mother though, then it slightly explains where Naveen would get his artistic interest from. Naveen's partner Pokemon is Scraggy. However, Naveen also happens to have an Aegislash's design on his tie. This hints that Naveen is likely going to be specializing in dark and ghost-type Pokemon. And just like with Lita, Naveen isn't shown wearing a Mega Ring in the trailer, but he does have one in the Sugimori art. This means that it's entirely likely that either Scrafty or Aegislash could receive a Mega Evolution. But considering Scraggy is Naveen's partner, I'd be much more inclined to say that the Mega Evolution will go to Scrafty. I feel the same about Scrafty getting a Mega Evolution as I do with Starmie, but the idea of Mega Aegislash sounds very interesting and I'd love to see that. Aegislash is already a final evolution and, in my opinion, a perfect candidate for a Mega Evolution. The inclusion of Lita and Naveen to Team MZ appears to hint that we're going to be essentially redoing the 5 Friends story that we saw in X and Y. Lita appears to be replacing the role of Tierno, while Naveen could be replacing either Trevor or Shauna. Urbane and Tawny are replacing the rival character, and the player is obviously replacing the protagonist of X and Y. I mentioned that Naveen could be replacing Trevor or Shauna because at this time I could see arguments for how Naveen's role could be similar to both. But Naveen will likely not be replacing both roles. This means that there will probably be a 5th member of Team MZ that we haven't been introduced to yet. This is also hinted towards by the presence of 5 chairs surrounding a table in Hotel Z, which could be implying that this is one of the meeting places of Team MZ. Urbane and Tawny are live-in staff members of Hotel Z working under AZ, which is strange since they're presumably pretty young to be working, but this implies that AZ probably has no issue with Team MZ using his hotel as a base of operations or a meeting place. Emma comes to mind as their potential 5th member of Team MZ, but she already has her own role to occupy, that being Looker's role, and she's the head of her own detective agency, so I doubt she has much time to participate in Team MZ activities. In addition to the possible new Mega Evolutions of Starmie and Scrafty, this raises the question of whether or not all of Team MZ will get their own new Mega Evolutions. Considering that both Lita and Naveen seem to be hinting at Mega Starmie and Mega Scrafty, surely we'll be able to Mega Evolve our starter, but I think a lot of people have already made that assumption, and rightfully so. Instead of speculating on what the Mega Mega Evolutions of the final evolutions of the starters could be, I'd like to try guessing what the Mega Evolution for Urbane and Tawny will be. We already know that Urbane and Tawny will be using the starter that is weak to yours, so it might seem obvious that they'll be using their starter as their Mega Pokemon. But I'd like to bring your attention to something. A Twitter user by the name of GenkiJPN managed to get some pictures of a sample of the Legends Z-A pre-order art book. In it, we see what you would expect. All of the revealed members of Team MZ so far, and their partner Pokemon. Harmony and Paxton are alongside the Z-A starters, Lita is with Staryu, and Naveen is with Scraggy. But the interesting part is that Urbane and Tawny are with both male and female Meowstic. This leads me to believe that just like Calum and Serena in X and Y, the main Pokemon that Urbane and Tawny utilize will not be a starter that you didn't pick. In X and Y, Serena and Calum can be battled in Killode City, where they, like Urbane and Tawny, do not use their starter as their main Pokemon. Instead, they use Absol as their Mega Pokemon of choice. So I'm thinking that Meowstic will be getting a Mega Evolution in Legends Z-A, and that said Mega will be Urbane and Tawny's true ace. Once again, I cannot say that I'm too excited about this idea, as I would have preferred Meowstic received a proper evolution. But at least Meowstic appears to be getting some much-needed love. I mentioned earlier that there was another element in Lita's potential homelessness, one that was shady and mafia-like. That would be referring to the Rust Syndicate. We're not exactly sure what the role of the Rust Syndicate is, only that it's an organization present in Lumio City, and it is led by a man known as Corbeau. Gotta say, Corbeau looks great. This is probably my favorite character design from Pokemon in the last decade. Anyway, Corbeau seems like a very angry or intense individual. It appears as though he and the Rust Syndicate will be specializing in steel and poison-type Pokemon. Corbeau himself is shown battling alongside an Arbok, but the arena in which he's battling has Steelix on the walls. Rust may be toxic, but it can't exist without metal, so it makes sense for the Rust Syndicate to utilize both types. Before I get into how Lita is involved in the Rust Syndicate, I want to talk about Corbeau's design. Corbeau looks fabulous with the drippy, drooling motif of his hair, suit, and shoes, but what I'd like to call your attention to is his pin. This pin has a keystone. While Corbeau does not appear to have a Mega Ring is only special because of the keystone it houses. This means that Corbeau will be utilizing Mega Evolution, and considering his partner Pokemon appears to be an Arbok, I'd suggest that Arbok will likely be receiving a Mega Evolution alongside all previously mentioned possible Mega Evolutions. I'm gonna say it again, I don't like it. I'd much rather Arbok get a real evolution. Not going to harp on it for too long, just disappointed. Although, it's entirely possible that Corbeau's Mega Pokemon will be Mega Steelix, considering what I said about the Steelix adorning the walls of the Rust Syndicate building. However, Corbeau himself does not appear to have any hints about using Steel-type Pokemon. Instead, it seems extremely likely that Corbeau represents the Poison-type half of the Rust Syndicate equation. The Steel-type appears to be represented by Corbeau's assistant, who at this time does not have a name. But he does have a very unique appearance. I'm gonna be honest, this guy looks like garbage. I know Pokemon is no stranger to having strange designs, but wow. This assistant is absolutely the Steel-type specialist of the Rust Syndicate, considering all the staples, chains, gold, and spikes on his head. I mentioned earlier that it might be possible for Corbeau's Mega Pokemon to be Mega Steelix, but I think it is almost certain that this assistant of Corbeau's will be utilizing Mega Steelix instead. We can see that he has a keystone on his suit pin, and he even sort of looks like Mega Steelix. So I could absolutely see Corbeau's assistant being the reason why there are depictions of Steelix in the Rust Syndicate. Speaking of decorations like the Steelix art on the walls, the Rust Syndicate has a lot of art in it. We can see there's an Overquill vase and a King Gambit statue. I'm a little surprised by the presence of the Overquill vase, since Overquill was previously a Hisuian Pokemon, but Game Freak has made it clear that a lot of Hisuian Pokemon aren't extinct, they're simply just a bit more rare. Scarlet and Violet brought back Ursaluna in the form of Blood Moon Ursaluna in the Kitakami region, so I guess anything is possible. These decorations may imply that Pokemon like Overquill and King Gambit may be obtainable in Legends Z-A, so I'm excited to see them again. Another art piece that has been catching everyone's attention lately has been the logo of the Rust Syndicate. I've seen a lot of people mention that this appears to be a Z crystal. While I do agree there is a resemblance, I highly doubt that this logo is hinting towards Z crystals. Legends Z-A already has its hands full with Mega Evolution being the central gimmick, so I doubt that Game Freak would even consider adding Z moves. We also need to consider that Z crystals are pieces of Necrozma that have been scattered via Ultra Wormholes. Ultra Wormholes can appear anywhere, everywhere, and in my last video I theorized that maybe Looker fell through an Ultra Wormhole. But there's already so much going on in Legends Z-A. Including Ultra Wormholes, Necrozma, and Z-moves feels incredibly unlikely. Not to mention, this design doesn't match any known Z-crystals. So even if this was somehow a Z-crystal, it'd have to be a new one, which makes this idea even more unbelievable in my opinion. Getting back to Corbeau, he too appears to be an immigrant to Lumio City, much like Harmony, Paxton, and Lita. PokéSuutamie, please forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, but I just had to include your finding here. PokéSuutamie noticed in the Japanese trailer that Corbeau has a very peculiar way of speaking, one that has historically been linked to Johto in the Pokemon world, but also has real-world origins. This is fascinating because this would make Corbeau the 4th character we've met so far that isn't from Lumio City. It also helps to explain why Corbeau's ace is an Arbok. If I had to guess, Corbeau is likely a Johto native, given all of the other hints and ties there are to the Johto region. If Corbeau is from Johto, then a few other easy-to-miss details suddenly click into place. The Overquill vase and the Steelix wall art are both somewhat related to Johto and may stand out. But interestingly, the battle area of the Rust Syndicate also holds a bit of a secret. If you haven't taken a close look at it, you might not notice that battles within the Rust Syndicate building are taking place on sand. Sand? In a building? That sounds like it'd be coarse and rough and irritating and like it'd get everywhere. But the more I look at it, I notice that the sand is actually part of what is known as a dry garden. But most of you probably recognize this as a Zen garden instead. As it turns out, dry gardens, also known as Zen gardens, originate from Kyoto, Japan. Kyoto, for those of you that don't know, is the real-world inspiration for Ecruteak City in Johto. So yes, the Rust Syndicate and Corbeau as a leader are Johto-coded from head to toe. I also really like the idea that Corbeau does have anger issues, but is trying to work on them. There aren't any hints about this in the trailer, but the presence of a dry garden in Corbeau's base of operations may imply that he's working on finding inner peace somehow. Ultimately, we don't know much about Corbeau, but the environmental storytelling in the Rust Syndicate is what I would consider to be a work of art that Game Freak certainly deserves nothing but praise for. Although, there is one piece of the Rust Syndicate that I can't quite place. I've already talked about the Steelix wall art, this Rust Syndicate logo likely being completely unrelated to Z-moves, and now I've talked about the sand in this room potentially being a Zen garden. But there's something else that I really just can't make heads or tails of. At the top of the wall with the Steelix wall art, there's this strangely face-like design made out of what appears to be gold, which seems to be made out of the same material that the Rust Syndicate logo is made out of. I have no idea what this could be, but it's possible that maybe this might be what Mega Arbok will bear some resemblance to. To be clear, I don't think this looks like Arbok. I think this looks more like a 3-eyed 50% Zygarde or maybe a 3-eyed Groudon or Kyogre. I think it's most likely something of chief importance to the Rust Syndicate considering it is made out of the same material as their logo. But as for what it could be, no idea. It could simply be a highly stylized design that has very little resemblance to what it is actually depicting. So for that reason, I'll be keeping it in the back of my mind, but not expecting any answers until we either see something that looks like it in the trailers or Legends Z-A releases. There is one other theory that has become quite popular, and that is that Corbeau could be Kieran and Carmine's father. Or at the very least, Corbeau could be related to Kieran and Carmine. Corbeau's facial features look very similar to Kieran and Carmine's, and his hair also looks fairly close to the purple of Kieran's. The theory also goes on to look at the Japanese names of Corbeau, Kieran, and Carmine, all of which are named after plants of the Saxifragales order. All 3 of these characters also appear to have troubles with anger management. The theory stems from Twitter user @DarkandWindy, who I just wanted to give a shout out to because I do think this theory is quite plausible. However, I'd like to bring up PokéSuutamie again. I mentioned earlier that it's highly likely that Corbeau is a Johto native, as hinted by his accent, which PokéSuutamie noticed. However, PokéSuutamie decided to weigh in on this theory too, but they state that these characters have completely different accents in Japanese, which at the very least means that Corbeau is likely not from Kitakami. I think the theory is still plausible though. After all, Corbeau could have grown up in Johto, then moved to Kitakami, had kids, and then ditched them to go to Lumio City. I know ditching your kids to go on a fun Yakuza adventure seems a bit dark for Pokemon, but this isn't the first time we've seen this. Giovanni retroactively did the same exact thing with Silver in Gen 1 since Silver hadn't been created by Game Freak yet, but also actively in Gen 2 when Silver was first introduced. Silver being essentially abandoned and ignored by Giovanni so that he can pursue his Mafia goals has only become more evident as Silver and Giovanni continue to appear across the Pokemon franchise, such as in Masters and Generations. Even if Corbeau doesn't turn out to be Kieran and Carmine's father, I still believe that it could be very likely that they are at least related somehow. Perhaps they're cousins or Corbeau is their uncle. I can't wait to find out. Before I move on from Corbeau, I just wanted to give a shout out to PokéSuutamie. I never would have caught any of this information about Corbeau without their observations, and I happen to know that they also have a YouTube channel, so I'll include a link to their channel down in the description. Lita appears to have gotten involved with the Rust Syndicate in some way. From what Corbeau says, it looks like Lita borrowed money from the Rust Syndicate, and now she has to do small odd jobs to repay what she borrowed. This is classic Mafia or Yakuza behavior, and Lita might end up being loan sharked. The Rust Syndicate may or may not be an antagonist group, but it does seem like one of many sources of potential side quests in the game. Keep side quests in mind, as I'll be coming back around to them later in the video. As I theorized in my previous video, the trainer with the Mega Lucario on the Legends Z-A box art was indeed Emma. Emma is now the head detective of her own agency. It also appears as though I was correct about her continuing to wear the Essentia suit from Pokémon X and Y. We can see that she has a keystone embedded on her chest, and unless there's a switch up, we already know that Emma will be utilizing a Mega Lucario at least once during Legends Z-A. That isn't to say that Mimi, Emma's Esper, is missing though. We actually received confirmation that Mimi is still around. Mimi even seems to have its own chair in Emma's office. Speaking of which, I noticed that part of Emma's new appearance, that being her hair clip, actually resembles Mimi, or rather Esper in general. Not that it's important, but this orange ring in Emma's hair looks very similar to what can be found under Esper's ears. I think it's an adorable detail. Emma's detective work appears to coincide with the goals of Quasartico and Team MZ. Emma is investigating the cause of the rogue Mega-Evolved Pokemon. In my previous video, I theorized that Emma would be investigating Quasartico, and that may still end up being true, but it seems like we'll be working alongside multiple different organizations in Lumio City at the same time, at least for a portion of the story. I'm not quite done talking about characters though, so the topic of rogue Mega-Evolved Pokemon will be another that I return to in a later section of this video. In my previous video, I noticed that Professor Sycamore's Pokemon Research Lab was still present in Lumio City despite the ongoing redevelopment. I thought that perhaps we'd be meeting Professor Sycamore again, and that would confirm whether or not Harmony and Paxton are Professor Sycamore's kids, which is a popular fan theory that I don't necessarily believe at this time. However, we got to see exactly who is currently operating the Pokemon Research Lab in Lumio City. Of all the people to be a Pokemon professor, I did not expect it to be Mabel. Some of you probably don't even recognize this character. Mabel is a former Team Flare admin. Team Flare's admins were very forgettable, so I think it's actually a very interesting idea to have them switch into a helping position for this story. However, it does raise a few questions though, such as why Team Flare members are in important positions like this so soon after their attempt at literal worldwide Putting that aside for a moment, I'm very excited to see what the ex-Team Flare members have been up to. They're still using the Team Flare logo too, albeit with potentially different colors. Mabel's office, formerly Professor Sycamore's office, has a laptop with the Team Flare branding, but it also has Professor Mabel's chair. Professor Mabel's chair, by the way, happens to look exactly like a gamer chair. Why? I have no idea, but it is funny. The Team Flare logo on the chair is blue, which could represent a reformed Team Flare, or it could simply be blue because that is the color that Mabel is associated with. Speaking of colors Mabel is associated with, Game Freak, give Mabel back her blue lipstick, please, I'm begging you! As a side note, Professor Mabel is using a Rotom tablet? Game Freak, we need to talk. Stop shoving Rotom into every electric device, please? Rotom's original gimmick, and even its name, imply that it should only be inhabiting items that have an electric motor. Rotom Fan has a motor. Rotom Frost has a motor. Rotom Wash has a motor. Rotom Mow has a motor. Rotom Heat, surprisingly yes, has a motor. You know what items don't have motors? The Pokédex, the PCs, phones, tablets. The Rotom Bike technically could have a motor, and the Rotom Drone has a motor, but all of these other items feel like Game Freak trying to force Rotom down my throat. Now, my Rotom phone can carry me across the space between two buildings. Sure, why not? It's starting to feel like we just can't have regular technology in Pokemon anymore without Rotom invading it. Might as well have a Pokeball powered by a Rotom that you don't even need to throw. Sorry for the tangent, moving on. Professor Mabel being in charge of the Pokemon Research Lab implies that the other Team Flare admins are probably doing other work too. If I had to guess, all of the Team Flare admins are currently working alongside Professor Mabel in some capacity. The only hint that I can find about this so far is the UI of the Pokédex. The UI of the Pokédex looks very similar to the UI of the Holocaster in Pokémon X and Y. We already know that the Holocaster is likely making a return in Legends Z-A thanks to this hologram we see in one of the previous trailers. But now that we know Mabel is the professor, it makes a lot more sense for how the Holocaster is returning. And Mabel being the professor, along with the other Team Flare admins potentially helping her, explains why the Pokédex has similar UI to the Holocaster. I should also mention that there appear to be two different Pokédex. Professor Mabel's character description on the Pokémon website states that there are indeed two different Pokédex. There is, of course, the regular Pokédex, but there is also something known as the Mega Evolution Pokédex. As far as I know, this is the first time we've ever had two completely separate Pokédex in a Pokémon game, and I'm interested in seeing what this is all about. The only question that remains regarding Mabel is why she's replacing Professor Sycamore. Where did he go? We know Sycamore has a history of journeying to other regions, and hey, maybe he's still in Kalos, just not in Lumio City. I'm very curious whether Professor Sycamore will appear in ZA, but if he doesn't, I at least hope we learn about where he's gone and why he left. Mabel is, after all, only the acting director of the Pokémon Research Lab, so presumably Professor Sycamore is meant to return at some point, though whether or not he returns during Legends Z-A remains to be seen. Before I move into other aspects of the trailer, I noticed there is one more character that I want to talk about before moving on. Nurse Joy is very pretty, and I just wanted to say that she looks great. Moving on. Are you enjoying the video so far? I hope you are. If you are, please consider subscribing. I'm doing my absolute best to grow a welcoming community of enthusiastic Pokémon fans. I love talking about Pokémon. Talking with my audience about their Pokémon experiences and their ideas about Pokémon is an incredible amount of fun, so I'm always looking to get more opinions and hear more unique takes about Pokémon. I always do my best to respond to each and every comment I get, so if there's something you'd like to say, feel free to leave a comment and I'll get to it as soon as I can. The YouTube algorithm demands that I once again ask you to subscribe, and now that I've done that, we can move on to another topic. With 3 theoretical Mega Evolutions mentioned so far in the video, what makes me think we'll even get new Mega Evolutions? Well, as luck would have it, the trailer also revealed Mega Dragonite of all things. To be honest, as exciting as it is to get new Mega Evolutions again, I can't say that I'm super excited about this design for Mega Dragonite. Is it bad? Not by any means. But I also don't consider this to be a good design either. I think this is a mid design, which is perfectly fine. But whether or not a design has appeal is entirely subjective, and I don't really have any ideas myself for what a Mega Dragonite should look like, so I can't really say much about this design other than that it doesn't exactly appeal to me, and I think I've seen better interpretations of what Mega Dragonite could be from fans. That said, I think Mega Dragonite would have been better received had they also released the Sugimori artwork for it. I know that sounds strange since we usually do get Sugimori artwork for each new Pokemon and character that is revealed in a trailer, but this time we didn't get any art for Mega Dragonite. Instead, all we got was a 3D render that, in my opinion, makes this design look much worse than it really is. For example, Mega Dragonite looks really good when a passionate artist like Kelvin makes art with it. Even aside from the design aspect, there is one positive that I think we can all agree on no matter if we like the design or not. Dragonite Knight should now exist. Speaking of Mega Evolutions though, the primary plot of the game appears to be centered around the rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon phenomenon. Previously, Mega Evolution has required Pokemon to meet 3 main criteria. In order to Mega Evolve, a Pokemon must hold a Mega Stone, the Pokemon must have a strong bond with their trainer, and the trainer must have a Keystone. These rules are consistent across all of the games, with formerly 1, now 2 exceptions. The previous exception was Mega Rayquaza, which was capable of utilizing Mega Evolution on its own. Rayquaza didn't need a Megastone because Rayquaza had a special organ called the Mikado organ that functionally served as its own Megastone. And Mega Rayquaza also didn't require a trainer with a Keystone or a strong bond, as it instead achieves Mega Evolution by tapping into the wishes of those around it. It's a bit strange and, in my opinion, a little convoluted, but Rayquaza is a Pokemon that will get that extra freaky Game Freak glazing no matter what, so okay, fine, Rayquaza is special when it comes to Mega Evolution. That is, Mega Rayquaza was special. Now, in Lumio City, Pokemon without trainers are randomly Mega Evolving. These Pokemon are described to be in pain and out of control. They go rogue, and presumably they're a huge problem for Lumio City and all the various people, Pokemon, and organizations found there. We know Team MZ, Emma, and Quasartico are investigating the phenomenon, but let's take a step back. How is it even happening to begin with? These are wild Pokemon that presumably don't hold Mega Stones and certainly don't have trainers with which they have strong bonds. We find out about a new resource in the trailer called Mega Shards. Mega Shards can be acquired by breaking clusters of Mega Crystals around Lumio City. These Mega Crystal clusters bear a striking resemblance to the Anistar City Sundial, but they also resemble Diancie. So I wouldn't be surprised to learn that somehow Diancie, the Anistar City Sundial, and the Mega Crystals appearing in Lumio City are all connected. Mega Shards can then be traded into Quasartico in return for Mega Stones. What Quasartico is doing with the Mega Shards remains to be seen, but considering that Mega Shards come from Mega Crystals and you trade them in for Mega Stones, I'm fairly confident that Quasartico is simply creating Mega Stones by using the Mega Shards. One interesting theory is that the rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon phenomenon is caused by the Z-A Royale itself. Let me explain. Mega Rayquaza, although a special case because of the Mikado organ, shows that it is technically possible for a Mega Evolution to take place without a trainer, instead using the wishes of an entire population to sustain itself. Well, it just so happens that the Z-A Royale is full of people who all have their own wishes they'd like granted. We still don't have confirmation for how the wishes are granted, but I theorized in my previous video that maybe it could be Jirachi or Hoopa. However, this amount of trainers and their concentrated dreams within Lumio City may just be enough to trigger Mega Evolution in random Pokemon, even if they aren't holding Mega Stones. To be honest, this does sound a bit far-fetched, but it seems plausible given what we currently know. Considering that Mega Crystals and Mega Shards are appearing randomly throughout Lumio City during redevelopment, and that Quasartico seems to be capable of turning these Mega Shards into Mega Stones, I've developed a theory. It seems plausible that the rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon phenomenon is caused by wild Pokemon getting into these Mega Crystals, getting covered in Mega Shards, and then tapping into the concentrated wishes of Lumio City in the same manner Mega Rayquaza does in the Hoenn region. Defeating rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon seems to make them drop a very bright item that I can't quite discern. But if I had to guess, this may be a key component required in the creation of Mega Stones in addition to the Mega Shards. In any case, it seems very likely that every Mega Pokemon will be making a return in Legends Z-A alongside new Mega Evolutions such as Mega Dragonite. Here's a list of every Pokemon confirmed for Legends Z-A that we already know has a Mega Evolution. Charizard, Beedrill, Pidgeot, Alakazam, Slowbro, Gengar, Kangaskhan, Pinsir, Gyarados, Aerodactyl, Dragonite, Ampharos, Steelix, Scizor, Heracross, Houndoom, Tyranitar, Gardevoir, Sableye, Mawile, Camerupt, Altaria, Banette, Absol, Salamence, Lopunny, Lucario, Abomasnow, and Gallade. I know that was quite the list, but here's a second list, this time covering all of the Pokemon capable of Mega Evolution that are missing from Legends Z-A so far. Venusaur, Blastoise, Mewtwo, Sceptile, Blaziken, Swampert, Aggron, Mightycham, Manectric, Sharpedo, Glalie, Metagross, Latias, Latios, Rayquaza, Garchomp, Audino, and Diancie. I think it's all but guaranteed that we'll be seeing all of these Mega Evolutions return in Legends Z-A, but some of them seem very strange. I covered how Mega Rayquaza may be important to Legends Z-A in my previous video, so if you're interested in how Game Freak might try to pander to Rayquaza in yet another game, check out my previous video after this one. As for the others though, Latias, Latios, and Mewtwo seem like the strangest. Mewtwo, for whatever reason, has been present in Kalos before. Latias and Latios, however, are a different story. Technically, there's no reason they couldn't be here, considering that they're essentially jets that can go wherever they want in the world. But barring some kind of raid den nonsense, I don't see why these Pokemon would be in Lumio City. Nevertheless, I am excited to see all of these Mega Evolved Pokemon make a return. And I'm also super excited to see Mega Charizard Z and Mega Charizard A make an appearance while Game Freak once again completely ignores Flygon, Chestnut, Delphox, and Greninja. Before I move on from the topic of Mega Evolution, there is one more thing I wanted to discuss related to the rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon phenomenon. I noticed that the rogue Mega Tyranitar we're fighting is massive. It seems like it's much bigger than it should be. This could be because rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon simply are larger than normal, but there's one interesting alternative possibility. This Tyranitar is an alpha Pokemon. It may sound strange given that, as I covered in my previous video, Pokemon Scale has been removed from Legends Z-A, and it may also sound strange because Alpha Pokemon were the gimmick of Legends Arceus and they did not make a return in Scarlet and Violet. However, Alpha Pokemon are confirmed to be returning in Legends Z-A. I'm quite happy that Alpha Pokemon are returning, but it does raise some questions. Alpha Pokemon were supposedly being created due to Giratina's influence in Legends Arceus, but there are no hints about Giratina being involved in Legends Z-A. Ultimately, this doesn't bother me much because honestly, I never understood why Alpha Pokemon were related to Giratina at all, and I think Alpha Pokemon are an excellent addition to Pokemon in general. And as far as the scale being removed goes, it seems like this is only true for non-alpha Pokemon. Alpha Pokemon are still stated as being larger than their regular counterparts. So it seems that while small, medium, and large size variations of Pokemon have been standardized into just one default size, alpha Pokemon at least will continue to be as imposing as ever. This, of course, brings me back to the Rogue Mega Evolved Tyranitar. This Pokemon is very large, but it's also missing the glowing red eyes that signify a Pokemon is an alpha. So currently, I believe that Rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon are simply just larger than normal Mega Pokemon for whatever reason. But I also noticed while looking at this Rogue Mega Evolved Tyranitar that my theory about the Mega Shards and Mega Crystals being the cause behind their Rogue Mega evolution seems to be strengthened by the ominously colored background, which just so happens to match the color of the Mega Crystals and Mega Shards. And one last thing about Rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon before I move on, but I also noticed that the player can dodge Pokemon attacks in the same way that they could in Legends Arceus. I know we've already seen Pokemon dodging moves on command in previous trailers, but this is the first time I've noticed the player doing a dodge roll. I actually went back and reviewed past trailers, and it turns out that I simply missed it before. Oops. Whether or not this type of dodging will be important or even possible in trainer battles is yet to be seen, but at the very least it will be a gameplay feature when battling wild Pokemon and Rogue Mega Evolutions. Something else returning from Pokemon Legends Arceus seems to be that you can send your Pokemon out to interact with specific parts of the world such as trees or rocks. I noticed in this shot with Naveen that there's one such breakable rock in the background. This isn't exactly a huge missed detail or anything, but I'm glad that there are things for our Pokemon to do in the world as opposed to letting Ride Pokemon handle everything. I mentioned earlier that we'll likely be working alongside Lita and the Rust Syndicate, with the Rust Syndicate being one of many potential sources of side quests. So far, we know of 5 potential sources of side quests: the Rust Syndicate, Quasartico Inc., Emma's Detective Agency, Professor Mabel with the Pokemon Research Lab, and Team MZ. Obviously, there could be others, but there seems to be a considerable focus on doing things in Lumio City. This is a refreshing change from Legends Arceus, which admittedly didn't have much to do after a certain point. The Diamond and Pearl clans felt fairly underutilized in my opinion, which was a bit of a letdown. But it looks like Game Freak has plenty of ways to keep Lumio City feeling fresh and exciting, which I'm super happy about. As for what these side quests will be, I've briefly touched on some of these topics, but I'd like to take a closer look at each of these potential sources of side quests to see what they might offer. The Rust Syndicate seems to be the most vague at this time, but even despite that vagueness, we can guess it'll be about earning money to help Lita work herself out of the debt she's gotten herself into. We know money is important since Corpo mentions finances, and lending out money before loan sharking is a classic Yakuza tactic. We also know that Emma's Detective Agency, Quasartico, Professor Mabel, and Team MZ all have special interest in researching and stopping the Rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon phenomenon. But we also know that Emma will be tasking the player with helping locals locate their missing items or Pokemon. And we also know that Professor Mabel will be rewarding the player with TMs and potentially other useful items as we help the Pokemon Research Lab with their study of Pokemon emerging post-Lumio City redevelopment. We should assume that each of these sources of side quests should have different focuses, even if they all happen to align when it comes to the Rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon phenomenon. It's also incredibly likely that there will be more organizations that we haven't heard about yet. There are 5 main districts in Lumio City, and we know that the Rust Syndicate is present in one of them. It's highly probable that each district of Lumio City could have their own organization in it. These organizations could be stand-ins for the lack of a gym challenge in Legends Z-A. Considering the Rust Syndicate seems to have 2 type specialists, those being Poison and Steel, it may be safe to assume that each organization may have up to 2 type specialists. This could mean that there may be up to 10 type specialists to battle in Legends Z-A, assuming each organization has 2 specialists. This is, of course, pure speculation, but it does seem somewhat plausible. Unlike Legends Arceus, where Pokemon battling wasn't common at the time, Lumio City is rife with Pokemon battling. And seeing as Z-A takes place in the modern day, and only within one city, maybe Game Freak decided to add something similar to an unofficial gym challenge in addition to the Z-A Royale. Although, I should note, it's also entirely possible that Quasartico, Emma's detective agency, and the Pokemon Research Lab may all be considered part of the one organization per district idea that I'm theorizing. I think it's unlikely considering that I doubt Emma and Mabel have much time to spend on Pokemon battles, but who knows? If this theory is true though, I think that tying one member of Team MZ to each organization seems highly likely. We already know that Lita will be tied to the Rust Syndicate. If Hotel Z is one of these potential 5 organizations, then Urbane and Tawny are already tied there, seeing as they're live-in staff members. Naveen, the player, and the hypothetical 5th member of Team MZ all may be tied to other organizations as well. If Quasartico or the Pokemon Research Lab count towards this theorized 5 organizations per district idea, then I could see the player being tied to either or both of them. Theoretically, each member of Team MZ will have a story that they need to tell, otherwise they'll end up being just as bland and boring as the X and Y 5 friends were. I will admit this does sound like a lot of content, so I'm skeptical on whether or not Game Freak truly could handle this. But I think there is considerable evidence to support these theories, so I'll hold out hope while we wait for more information. I've mentioned Team MZ a lot so far, but have you ever stopped to consider what MZ even means? I have, but unfortunately the only thing that comes to mind feels a bit on the nose. At this time, all I can think of is Team Mega Zygarde. I know, this sounds a bit silly, and it's probably wrong, but maybe there's more to it. We know that Zygarde is going to be important to the plot. After all, it was front and center in the first trailer in its 10% form, and the game is presumably named after it. We also know that there are Zygarde cells moving around Lumio City, so it isn't unreasonable to believe that we'll be assembling a 100% Zygarde throughout the course of the game. I also don't think it's unreasonable to expect Mega Zygarde in ZA, considering we already know new Mega Pokemon are coming thanks to Mega Dragonite. Mega Zygarde seems inevitable to some degree, but presumably this will only be possible with 100% Zygarde, since Mega Evolution is described as pushing a Pokemon beyond what they're capable of naturally. 100% Zygarde is the limit, so I feel as though Mega Evolving Zygarde without it being at 100% would result in a temporary shift to a higher percentage. So for example, Mega Zygarde at 10% would result in Zygarde simply becoming 50% Zygarde. In any case, we already know that in order for Zygarde to reach 100%, Zygarde requires multiple cores. In the past, we've only seen one Zygarde core in the games, that being the red Zygarde core. But the anime introduced us to a blue Zygarde core. However, we see in 100% Zygarde's concept art that there are actually up to 5 different Zygarde cores, those being blue, cyan, white, orange, and finally red. Here's where my theory about Zygarde becomes a bit more interesting. I propose that all 5 Zygarde cores will be present in Legends Z-A. We've already seen the red Zygarde core in previous Z-A trailers, but considering that there are 5 Zygarde cores, 5 districts in Lumio City, and likely 5 friends in Team MZ, I'm guessing that not only will all of the 5 Zygarde cores show up, but they'll all likely be tied to the intertwined stories of the Team MZ members and their associated organization stories. So for example, maybe the red Zygarde core will be possible to obtain after helping Hotel Z, while the cyan Zygarde core will be obtainable after helping Lita out in regards to the Rust Syndicate. While it might sound far-fetched, I truly believe that this may be exactly what Game Freak is planning, and if so, I'm very excited. I've always wanted to see the other 3 Zygarde cores, but I never expected that they might be obtainable in-game. I know I just mentioned 5 districts and made the repeating number of 5 important when it comes to certain parts of my theory, but I also think there is a high likelihood of there being a 6th district. In my previous video, I discussed how I think the climax of ZA could take place within, at the top, or potentially underneath the Prism Tower. In that part of my video, I touched on the Paris Catacombs potentially making an appearance in ZA, perhaps as something like the Lumiose Catacombs. But in the time that has passed since I released that video, another thought has occurred to me. What if the potential underground district isn't the Paris Catacombs, but instead the Paris Metro? The Paris Catacombs honestly seem like a more interesting option to me, considering the possible ghost or dark-type Pokemon that may dwell within such a location. However, trains have been important in Kalos before. Professor Sycamore, who is now missing, had connection to 2 different trains in X and Y. The first train Professor Sycamore is related to that you may think of is the train the player can meet Professor Sycamore at before he gifts them with the TMV Pass. This pass allows the player to travel to Killode City, which is the extent of the X and Y post-game. The second train that Professor Sycamore is tied to is the train in Kuraway Town. There's a short note that can be found in the railway station in Kuraway Town that was written by a younger Professor Sycamore to his future self. Because Sycamore is connected to two different trains in X and Y, I think it's highly likely that Sycamore, before the events of Z-A, has departed Lumio City by train, or perhaps will return to Lumio City by train near or after the climax of the story. And let's not forget, but even Harmony and Paxton arrived via train in Z-A, something that was only just revealed in the most recent trailer. All of this interesting, somewhat loosely connected focus on trains lead me to believe that there may be an entire rail system the player may be able to explore, if not simply traverse. Game Freak has stated that Z-A will be limited to Lumio City, and we haven't seen any trains in any of the trailers with the exception of the train that Harmony arrives on. And the Lumio City map that we have shows no rails in Lumios. This means that if trains are going to appear in Lumios, they'll have to be underground, thus the potential 6th district. That's enough head-scratching speculation for now, so let's focus on features that have already been confirmed for Z-A. Something that I completely overlooked in my last video was that Pokemon Power, or PP for short, has been removed. I did mention in my last video that cooldowns were being introduced, but I completely missed that none of the moves have an actual use limit on them. I noticed this time thanks to the reward screen for completing Professor Mabel's missions. You'll notice that there's an entry for move category, move type, move description, move number, and move cooldown timer, but no mention anywhere for move use limit. I'm really not sure how to feel about this. On one hand, awesome! I don't have to go back to the Pokemon Center as often if I don't need to heal. Move limits were incredibly frustrating in Legends Arceus, but then again, move limits were directly tied to the Agile and Strong Style system. And also, there weren't hardly any trainer battles in Legends Arceus. Legends Z-A, by contrast, appears to have less exploration, far more trainer battles, and apparently no move style system. So in theory, you should be using your moves more often in Z-A, but you also shouldn't be as far away from a Pokemon Center. It just seems a bit strange is all. I am super excited to see the move cooldowns in action, but I cited in my last video that Game Freak is making some changes that really feel like they're straying away from Pokemon's gameplay identity. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is worth discussing in my opinion, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Following Pokemon has been confirmed to be returning. Thankfully, this implementation of Following Pokemon seems to be a significant improvement over what Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl had to offer. Not that that's a high bar though. However, even though this is a significant improvement, following Pokemon in Z-A aren't without flaw. Apparently, Pokemon are only capable of following the player in specific environments. Most of the environments where Pokemon can follow the player are wild zones, but we did see following Pokemon in a few places in the most recent trailer that weren't wild zones. So it seems like there will be plenty of places for you and your Pokemon to bond, just not everywhere. I know I sort of called it a flaw a moment ago, and I did so because ideally your Pokemon should be able to follow you anywhere as long as space allows it. But so long as there is an adequate quantity of large open spaces where players can interact with their following Pokemon, I'm sure most people won't care about the few spaces where following Pokemon aren't allowed. Surprising no one, player customization is once again returning. I mentioned in my previous video that protagonist customization has only become better with each release, and so long as the general proportions of a player character look good, I don't tend to judge the protagonist designs too harshly. But I did not expect just how amazing the new trainer customization in Z-A would be. It's really impressive how much you can do with your protagonist in Legends Z-A. Game Freak has even included dual-colored hair this time around. Obviously, there may be issues with how the customization works that we don't know yet, but I will say that based on everything we've seen in this trailer alone, I am super impressed with Game Freak's improvements to customization. I originally had a big rant written for this section of the video detailing how disappointed I was that Japan was getting, in my opinion, an objectively better pre-order bonus in the trench coat. I was under the impression that this trench coat would only be accessible through the pre-order bonus, but as it turns out, my initial feelings about this were inaccurate. If any of you felt the same way I did, you can put those worries to rest. The pre-order bonus for Japan actually included 3 different trench coats, all being different colors. But each of these trench coats can be acquired through normal gameplay according to a small disclaimer at the bottom of the trench coat pre-order bonus images. I suspect that we'll be able to earn these trench coats by completing side quests or even main quests alongside Emma and her detective agency, which I think would be wonderful. All this talk about player customization makes me think about taking pictures of my character, and fortunately Game Freak thought about how many people might feel the same. It seems as though Game Freak also wanted to add some other function to the anti-homeless benches aside from simply being a general nuisance and being gross. It would appear as though Game Freak has combined the X and Y benches with photo spots. When you sit on an anti-homeless bench in Legends Z-A, you'll now be able to throw your Pokémon out to play. But just like the homeless and people with disabilities, Pokémon are not allowed on this bench. These benches are for real people only. Jokes aside, I do really appreciate that Game Freak has added a photo mode to Legends Z-A. Things like this add a ton of soul into the game. Features like this in Camping and Sword and Shield are at the heart of what I consider Pokemon to be. Seeing Pokemon I caught and have journeyed with having fun and being Pokemon will always be more important to me than literally anything else. I'm still chasing those feelings of playing Pokemon Channel all these years later. Despite what I just said, Game Freak's decision to include anti-homeless benches in Legends Z-A means that every time I take a screenshot of my character and my Pokémon, that anti-homeless bench will be there, a dark reminder of reality. I have no idea why Game Freak thought it'd be a good idea to lock using a wholesome, super cute feature behind forcing the player to interact with an anti-homeless bench. Although, because the anti-homeless benches are now known to be feature important, that raises my hopes that Game Freak has included the anti-homeless benches for narrative reasons instead of blindly following whatever modern architecture is doing. There's no way Game Freak would accidentally add anti-homeless benches, especially when the benches themselves are mandatory to use if you want to use a photo spot. What I mean is that I actually think it may be a great idea to have anti-homeless benches in the game and in every photo from photo mode if there's an important narrative tied to it. For example, if Lita becomes a beloved character who has struggled with homelessness and these anti-homeless benches are a reoccurring theme in her story, then someone who plays Legends Z-A will think of Lita and her struggles every time they see a real-life anti-homeless bench. This isn't all that different from what Game Freak recently did with Penny and Team Star in Scarlet and Violet. Ultimately, I just want there to be a good reason for these benches to be so prominent in Legends Z-A, as opposed to Game Freak simply including them for the sake of it. That about covers my thoughts on the latest Z-A trailer. Reminder to hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, and remember to leave a comment if there's anything you'd like to say. That's it from me, and I hope to catch you in the next video.